Hi everyone. I'm the Director for Common Knowledge Trust, and this is our fourth free COVID-19 birth skills online class. So just remember that in the early 1970s, I and hundreds of mothers and fathers developed what's now known as Birthing Better. And I put all of that into a charitable trust when I immigrated to New Zealand in 1995. Because technology caught up to our ability to create mixed media resources. And now all these skills are online. So today we want to talk about individuality in birth. In the past few lessons, I gave an introduction, lesson one. Second lesson, we talked about the body skills, how to prepare your body. Because in 1970, when I gave birth, 4.5% of women had cesareans. And as mentioned before, the fact that 95% of us labored was sort of the tool that the natural birth movement used to say, see, we don't need so many cesareans. Birth is normal and women can birth. See, the cesarean rate was 4.5%. But they didn't look more deeply and they really weren't realistic. The fact is that the 95% who did give birth, it was because cesareans were major abdominal surgery done to save a woman's life or in very peculiar situations. The medical profession hadn't developed sufficiently, and so when we labored back then in 1970, we labored because there was no option. We could labor for hours or days, we could cope or suffer, we could have a good outcome or a poor outcome. And it was consumers, I've lived through this, so I know it was consumers that demanded that risks be reduced. So we didn't want our twin to potentially die. We didn't want our breech baby to potentially die. There was no shot for Rh negative back then, no RhoGAM shot. Nobody was testing for strep B. So we just labored, whether we had a good outcome or not, whether we suffered or not. And back then in 1970, there was a skills-based approach to childbirth. They were the first childbirth classes ever taught, Lamaze and Bradley. And there was a high societal expectation that we all go to those classes and learn skills. And as mentioned, it was great because multiple millions of us use skills, and our husbands were with us, and as birth coaches, they use skills. So labor and delivery nurses and obstetricians saw multiple millions of women no longer suffering so much in childbirth. But unfortunately, the goals of those skills were limited to theoretically low-risk pregnancy, low-risk birth, with the goals of having a natural birth, pain-free labor, with no medical care. If the goals then had been to cope, to manage, to deal with, to handle, to stay on top of, to feel in control, then we would have grown a skilled birthing population today. It would be natural and normal for all of you to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills and commit to using those skills while you do the activity of birthing your baby, because you got pregnant to have a baby. You didn't get pregnant to have a type of birth. You just got pregnant to have a baby. So we need to remember what reality was. We can't keep living in this fantasy world that the medical profession is out to get women, that medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures that became known as interventions, with the implication they were imposed on women and unnecessary, and that women should just choose to say no to all interventions, as though if we birthed without medical care, that everything would be fine. And it's not a question that women died in childbirth. We know that. It's a question is there are multiple issues that occur. And one of the big ones is suffering. We just lack skills. So we need to now grow a skilled birthing population where it's natural and normal in pregnancy to self-learn birth skills. And thankfully, now we don't have to go to classes. We can go online and get them. And there are a number of them, not just Lamaze and Bradley. or not just Birthing Better. So you need to understand that things have changed, but what hasn't changed is pregnancy and birth. So let's talk about individuality, because that's been a huge focus of what the natural birth movement in the 70s and 80s um, advocated. Is they basically said skills don't achieve those three narrow goals of a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care, so women just need choice. They just need to say no to those assessments, monitoring, and procedures. There were the standards of care, the evidence-based practice, the guidelines to practice that were now known as interventions that were obviously imposed on women and unnecessary. So when I teach midwives, I live in New Zealand that has a midwifery-led maternity system, which means all women have their own midwife. They're all direct entry. It's free of service. Women have choices. That's the partnership model. And the cesarean rate has gone up from 12.9% to almost 30% because New Zealand midwives didn't strengthen their partnership by insisting, requiring, demanding, educating, inspiring families to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills and then use them, no matter how their birth unfolds. The focus is still to try to have more natural births. So when we talk about individuality, it's been ingrained in us since the 80s, when I had my last child in 1982. But we didn't have choices in 1970. We had skills, and that meant that multiple millions of us were seen as being skilled. And now none of us are seen as being skilled. It's really rare for a birth professional to see highly skilled women or even vaguely skilled women or birth coaching dads. They were relegated to just supporting choices. So when I teach midwives and I say to the New Zealand midwives, what does your profession want? They say, well, we want more natural births. Nobody's ever looked at the word normal and natural, because a woman can bleed, that's normal. She can tear, that's natural. She can suffer, that's normal and natural. She can labor for days, that's normal and natural. She doesn't have to die to have a horrible experience. So the implication now is that the word normal and natural means easy, good outcome. And this is where we twist things. So when I say to New Zealand midwives, who are incredibly dedicated and deeply loved, what does your profession want? They want more natural births. They want more normal births that are pain-free, hopefully, and without medical interventions. Because I asked them, well, what's stopping more women from having normal births? And they say interventions. So they make a list of them. The common ones are induction, or stripping your membranes, or breaking your water bag, or not allowing you to get out of bed, or you name it. Doing a vaginal exam, doing an episiotomy, obviously a cesarean, hooking you up to an IV, hooking you up to a fetal monitor. In fact, there's a list of about 28 things that are considered interventions. How hard is that? What are women saying to each other? You have to avoid 28 things to have the birth that I, as a midwife, want you to have. That's crazy. So when Birthing Better families developed the skills in the 70s, it was for all births, because we get pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. And this is where our individuality collides with our commonality. So what is our individuality? You're you, I'm me. People who are watching this may be women or men. Some of you may be pregnant. Some of you may not be. Some of you may have a different skin color, different religion, live in a different part of the world. You see you as different from me. Oh, if you're a woman, you're going to see me as a woman. But then you're going to make a list of all the things that make me different from you. I'm older, I'm not pregnant. Why am I talking about this? So the reality is we see ourselves as very individual. We're dealing with our individual maternity system. We're dealing with our local maternity system, or the local midwives or doctors, or the legality. We're dealing perhaps in wars or in famines. Or perhaps we're rich or we're poor and we're in an abusive relationship. We're individuals. But here's the thing. We have a stronger commonality. And this is one of the great truths. We are all one humanity. We separate each other by distorted mind beliefs. We are all one humanity. Any woman of childbearing age can get pregnant from any fertile man around the world. And that child can be brought up in any culture, with any language, any religion, any food, any weather patterns of where that child lives. We are all one humanity. So our individuality is plucked out of the greater truth. We are all one humanity. And the next great truth is you're either pregnant or you're not. I am not pregnant. I do not fall into that exclusive group of pregnant women. But when you are in that group, you are in that group. And there is only one way out of pregnancy, and that is some form of birth, one way or another. And the reality is, an abortion or a termination is a birth. Every woman who terminates her pregnancy knows she's terminating a child. We're not stupid. We know that. We're making a choice. And we're making a safer choice in developed countries than what we did around the world for eons. You think that women just want to get pregnant anytime and all the time? Then it's not realistic. And that isn't an indication of how women behaved. We all tried to prevent unwanted pregnancies. We have all tried to terminate unwanted pregnancies. And in some cultures, throughout histories, unwanted babies were killed at birth. So we need to understand that a termination is a form of birth. A miscarriage is a form of birth. Having a premature baby is a form of birth. Having twins is a form of birth. Having a breech baby is a form of birth. Having diabetes when you're pregnant is a form of birth. But when we're pregnant, we fall into our commonality. And that commonality gets more intense because 100% of us will give birth one way or another. And so Birthing Better Skills, when we developed it, we were faced with our individuality, the beginning of a choice-based childbirth trend, and we were dealing with the greater truths of the reality. 100% of us were going to give birth. And our commonality extended beyond that. Do you blink? I do. Can you cough? I can. Can you tighten up your rectum? I can. Any woman or man can do that. No matter the age, I'm 76 and I can still do those things. We are all one humanity. We have the same number of bones in our body, the same muscles. So we are dealing with our commonality in pregnancy and birth, and that's what Birthing Better Families focused on, was if we could develop skills around our commonality, and the commonality that we would give birth, the commonality that giving birth, and giving is such a weak verb. So we do the activity, and even do is really a weak verb. We cope. We have to get through birth one way or the other. Whether we're driving to the hospital, being prepped, and having a surgical birth, that's still an activity over time. We're still doing it. We can either let birth happen to us and feel passive, or we can have skills. And our trust in New Zealand, our NGO, advocates for a societal concept to go back, that it becomes essential, normal and natural, that when you're pregnant you become skilled. And you learn skills and you use skills to do the activity of birthing your baby. And why is that? It's because humans thrive on being skilled. We absolutely thrive on being skilled. We all know what it feels like when we're faced with an activity and we lack skills. You can't just fling two people who feel sexually interested in each other in bed and expect them necessarily to have a great experience, because if they haven't learned skills, then they don't know how to please each other and they don't know how to become pleased. If you're hungry and you're in a foreign country and you're faced with foods you don't know, or trees that have beautiful fruits and berries on them, you don't instinctively know what foods are safe to eat. That's why we spend so much time taking things out of our children's mouths. Because birth is a natural physiological event, it doesn't mean it's a healthy physiological event. It doesn't mean that we cope with a physiological activity well or that we like it. It means that we have to do it. And if we can do it with skills, then we will do it better, just as we do any activity better. The difference between birth and 99% of the activities that we do as human beings is that it's a one-off and it's infrequent. Even the families that I've worked with that have 10 to 20 children, having 20 births in your life, which very few women have, very few women have 10. That's infrequent. Think of how many times you have sex. Think of how many times you eat. Think of how many times you get sick. That's natural and normal. Just think of birth as a one-off, non-repeatable activity. It's like your Mount Everest. It's like your Olympic event. Would you climb Mount Everest without having trained? Well, you would have gone up other mountains. And with birth, we can't go up other births. It's a one-off. And there's a global truth. There's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And that's always been true. And we're hardwired to understand that. In fact, we're hardwired as human beings to be very frightened or anxious about childbirth. But the natural birth movement said to us, don't be afraid of birth. Birth is natural. Women instinctively know how to birth. But we need to break that down. Birth is natural. Good things happen, bad things happen. Women cope beautifully. Women feel they suffer. That's natural. So we can't co-opt that word and imply something that it isn't. So we need to understand that, I forgot what I was going to say. That's amazing. Okay, so we have to understand that we are individuals dealing with this commonality, which means because we all blink and cough and can tighten up our rectum, Birthing Better Families settled on that because we couldn't solve the riddle of childbirth on an individual basis because there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. I remember what I was going to say, so hold on. What we had to do was to solve the problem from our commonality and to solve it from the commonality of the fact that we were going to do an activity and that all activities are best done with skills. And that's what this free COVID-19 course, Birth Skills course is about, is the skills. And one of the skills is placing your individuality into the commonality. So what I was going to talk about was that we are hardwired to fear or be anxious at birth. Now, a lot of people go, well, that's not true. It's instinctive. We are going to do it. We shouldn't be afraid of it. Of course we should be afraid of it because it's infrequent, it's very big, it's life-transforming, and every culture around the world throughout time knew that pregnancy, birth, early newborn period, and then children up to 5, that this was a very risky time. It didn't mean that risks always presented problems. It meant that many problems could occur during that period of time. In fact, immunizations and antibiotics are very, very new. And every culture around the world experienced the same thing prior to that. 25 to 30% of children under the age of 5 died from childhood diseases. People died from infections before antibiotics or immunizations. So we as human beings are hardwired to be afraid of childbirth. But it's interpreted in the modern world as fear, what's called unrealistic fear, that you fear that anything and everything is going to occur. But when we take away medical care, who do we have to rely on? Who are we relying on? If you take away modern medicine, who are you relying on? You have to rely on yourself, or you have to rely on your culture's health system, which every culture has, and they're all very sophisticated. So we have to rely on ourselves. And the reason that we're hardwired to fear pregnancy and particularly birth is that fear makes us more attentive and makes us more observant. And that's good. If we develop the gift of fear in pregnancy, if we can determine in ourselves whether something we feel is putting ourselves or baby at risk immediately within 5 minutes, then we need to seek help. If we fear that something is putting ourselves or our babies at risk of death or injury within 12 hours, then we need to respond to that and seek appropriate health or do something for ourselves. If we don't think it's going to be that immediate, the gift of fear gives us the ability to be observant. Now, why do we need to grow this in pregnancy and childbirth? Why is this part of our commonality? Why is it important for individuals to understand that in pregnancy we are by nature hardwired to be anxious and fearful about birth? Because after birth, we're faced with this child. What can a newborn child do? Can it talk to us? Can it tell us it's not feeling well? Can it tell us what it needs? Very limited. It makes sounds. It moves. So if we grow this gift of fear and understand it and become observant and highly aware in pregnancy and in birth, and if we can determine the difference between something that we feel needs attention right now or shortly from observation, then we will be less frightened of our newborns because we will have grown that gift so that we can look at our newborn and say, okay, that baby was sleeping now. Everything's fine. Oops, the baby's moving. The baby's beginning to move and beginning to make some noises. What's the matter? And that comment, what's the matter, comes from a woman who has not been taught to grow that gift of fear. And so she doesn't know whether that movement or that squirming or that sound means that that baby is at risk of dying or being injured within the next 5 minutes or 12 hours. So she doesn't know how to respond. So when the natural birth movement came along and said, it's instinctive and we don't need skills, we just need choices. Well, choices are variable. Some women lack choices. Some women's choices change. Some women's choices unfold just as they want and they hated it. Some women's choices don't unfold the way that they want and they are scarred for life. But when we have skills, we are never scarred for life. We always feel empowered when we use some form of skills, when we do any activity. You see this in your children if you have children. You see how empowered they become. You see how often they keep learning skills. We as humans keep learning skills, and we have been told since the 80s not to bother. And instead of evolving the Lamaze and the Bradley and the Grantley Dick Reed, which was taught in New Zealand, the messages through famous authors, through childbirth educators, through midwives, has been skills. Your skill is to do all this research and make choices. That's your skill. It's not about how you cope or manage or work through or deal with or handle or stay on top of or feel in control. Those are very proactive words that imply something. How do I cope? How do I manage? How do I work through an activity? How do I deal with internal sensations that make me uncomfortable? How do I deal with what's happening to or around me? How do I stay on top of things that are unpleasant to me? How do I feel in control when I can't control anything about the birth? Because there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like. And so it is going to unfold. Women know this. As soon as we fall pregnant, we feel out of control. And we spend a large part of our pregnancy trying to gain control. We lose something of ourselves as this child grows inside us. And often, as women who have had children, we know that that attention to other, that baby, we don't really reclaim ourselves for a number of years. And then if we fall pregnant again, we lose ourselves. Some women are very addicted to losing themselves in pregnancy because they love that sharing with another human being that intimately. And that's why many women, when their children grow up and leave home, go through such depression because they have tied their identity to their children. And what they misunderstand is that none of us are raising children. We are all raising future adults. So our job as parents is to teach these young people the skills to be able to live life being skilled. If you didn't teach your children to cook, if you weren't taught to cook, it takes time to learn to cook. Being hungry now means that we can go to any store and get pre-prepared food. But if you took that away, we didn't have this throughout our humanity. We had to go get our food. That requires skills. We had to prepare that food. That required skills. And in some cultures, their staple food is poison if you eat it raw. It takes steps to make it safe to eat. That's skills. Being pregnant, we develop skills in pregnancy. We don't always understand that we're developing them. For instance, what happens when our belly gets really big and our stomach gets pushed up? We find that we can't eat as big a meal. Sometimes we can't eat certain foods. Knowing that's a skill, we don't think of it as a skill. It is a skill because our human brain works differently than most other species, with the exception of elephants, dolphins, whales, great apes, chimpanzees, and stuff like that. They use skills. So if we become skilled in pregnancy to birth our baby and we use skills in birth to manage well, we will come out of that experience feeling more confident to parent our children. That's natural. What's also natural is that as skilled adults, before we get pregnant, if we come into pregnancy and we approach birth from only a choice basis, we don't develop skills, and we have a birth that you never know what it's going to be like, and it unfolds, and most births are not like anything we plan because babies don't come to plan. We go through that birth with a lack of skills. We can come out of that experience feeling shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, trauma, and that makes it harder for us to let go of the birth and parent our children. So when Birthing Better families were faced with the beginning of our individuality around childbirth in the 70s, we stuck to the commonality. We developed the skills based on we blink, we cough, we can tighten up our rectum, which was good news. That meant that the men that were coming with us to births could share a set of skills with us. Lamaze had fathers timing contractions, which sometimes was very helpful. We were supposed to be a rag doll and be very limp on the outside, so they'd pick up our arms and see if that was true. They'd breathe with us, but the breathing, we couldn't sustain breathing like this. It was just impractical. You hyperventilate and end up feeling faint and nauseous, and you breathe into a brown paper bag. Bradley was in the nose, out the mouth. But as we talked about in the class yesterday, it can sound like this. It can sound like this. It can sound like this. Oh, it can sound like this. Ah! And there are other ways that we breathe in the nose and out the mouth. We can sound like this. Ah, ah. Or we can sound like this. Ah, ah, ah. So that one breathing pattern that we all share in commonality has individual changes. Two of them are relaxing. We can use those skills to help us cope and manage. Right? Two of them indicate to our partner or other that we are not coping with the internal sensations or what's happening to or around us. Oh, ah! Now, when we live in a culture where skills are dismissed and disdained, then when women spend hours doing, oh, 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 birth professionals go, she'll get through it. It's just what women do. Women do not want to suffer in childbirth. They do not want to feel out of control. They want to cope. And the way we cope is by growing a self-learning, skilled birthing population. So for 50 years, I've listened to birth professionals and birth workers say, women should just be left alone to discover birth for themselves. Oh, how she's behaving. It's just instinctive. She should just be supported in that. Do you know how crazy that is? That is just so crazy. So I'll give you an example of this. In New Zealand, where we have a wonderful midwifery model of care, it's absolutely wonderful, but it's going to fall apart because midwives back in the 90s, when they became lead maternity carers, set up a partnership based on a premise that is pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events, which is wonderful, as long as you understand what the word normal means. So if you assume that it's easy and safe and a good outcome, then why are midwives going to school for 4 years? That doesn't make sense. It's an inconsistency, right? Why are they giving women 24/7 care? That's an inconsistency. When do we ever give anybody 24/7 care? That's a high level of emergency. Or it's a helicopter parent, which doesn't permit the other person to mature. It weakens them. They become dependent. And when you have a partnership where one partner is highly skilled of 4 years of training, and the other partner is just to choose what they want, but babies don't come to plan, and choices are very fickle, then, and you give women 24/7 care, then you have a very weak maternity system. And that's what's happened in New Zealand, sadly, what's happened. And it could have not been that way. But New Zealand midwives come as an end of the movement of the natural birth movement, the home birth movement, and the midwifery movement. It comes from the 70s and the 80s that separated natural birth from medical birth, midwives from doctors, home births from hospitals, interventions, no interventions, instead of realizing that 100% of pregnant women will give birth one way or another. We get pregnant to have a baby, not a birth. And all of us will be more dignified and empowered if we have the skills to birth our baby. We have to heal the wound that was created in the 60s and the 70s that said skills are only for low-risk women. That's the ideal group. Skills should have been for all of us because we have this commonality. We don't have this individuality as much as the commonality. 100% of pregnant women will give birth, and it's an activity each of us does. So had we said that back then, and had we continued developing skills and evolving skills, we would have skilled birthing women going into hospitals now where they cannot have a support person. Because here's another fact of our commonality that we cannot avoid. Every woman births alone. It's just the fact of it. We're the only one who's pregnant. We're the only one who's doing the birth. Nobody can do the birth for us. We can't stop for lunch. We can't do it the next day. Nobody can do the birth for us. So let's take a scenario. Let's just assume that all women birth physically where there is no one else present. Let's just assume that. Some cultures throughout time, that's been true. Women go off by themselves to birth. So let's just assume, let's take away everything. And you're pregnant now, and you're going to birth by yourself, whether you want to or not, whether you have risk factors or not, whether your baby has risk factors or not. No matter what happens, you have to do this by yourself. Wouldn't you appreciate having grown that gift of fear so that you can ask yourself, do I feel what I'm feeling now is a risk for myself or my baby? Wouldn't you feel that if you had the answer yes, that you might then try something? If you had the answer no, don't you think that you would then settle down a little bit more? Of course you would. But if you've been told not to be afraid, then you've never developed that skill. So if you didn't have skills and you birthed on your own, do you think you'd cope as well or manage as well? Well, maybe. Maybe you'd be one of the lucky women who don't feel that labor pain's particularly important. I've been at births where women don't feel anything except weird. You're saying, wait, weird? What's weird? I'm feeling weird now. And her uterus is just rock solid. Well, she's feeling weird, but she's not feeling pain. But the vast majority of women, we do feel pain. And the vast majority of us feel out of control with very progressive contractions, at least for some part of our labor. So if we're birthing alone, wouldn't we like some skills to cope and manage? Of course we would. So what happens to us as women, because that's our individuality and our commonality. If we have skills, then we are going to cope with this activity better, and we're going to birth better for ourselves. The outcome still may be tragic, right? That's true. But we'd have better skills to cope and manage, even with the challenges and the tragedies. So what happens when you put one person in the room with a birthing woman, or in the forest, or by the rice paddy, or in the back of the taxi, wherever? If somebody else is with that woman birthing, what will we do? We will turn to that other person to help us cope. If we lack skills, we will turn to anybody else if they're present and hope they know how to help us cope and manage. If they lack skills, they will try, but they don't know how. And we know they don't know how. And that's why when we change fathers from specific skills and had them be a coach to help us cope and manage and made them support people, they stopped knowing how to help. And we knew that. Skilled mothers and fathers were more likely to work together better after the baby was born and to grow their relationship as skilled adults and parents and partners. Unskilled mothers with unskilled husbands or partners at births are more likely to push that unskilled person away when they have to focus on taking care of the baby. That's just the reality. and then the relationship becomes very rocky. If we're going to change childbirth, the first change we need to make is we must grow a self-learning, skilled birthing population. So if that woman is birthing with another person present, she expects them to help her. But what happens to us if we expect somebody else to help us? We don't dig down. If we have skills, because we may stop using them because we think that other person knows something. That's why it's so complicated with the relationship we have with our birth providers, whether they're obstetricians, midwives, or doulas. We have an expectation that they know how we should birth and will help us do that. And so if we are birthing with another person present, that's what goes through our mind. They'll help us. But if we have skills and we are told in our society, you must use your skills, you have to use your skills, then we begin to dig down and use them because we know the global truth and our commonality. Nobody can do the birth for us. We are always birthing alone. And if our society, if it's implanted into our society that we must use skills to birth our baby and keep using them, then that other person can share a set of skills and we can work together as empowered people. Now, our NGO has always used an analogy about the Department of Transportation, which has irritated the bejesus out of the natural birth movement. But it's a very good example. Anyone who is old enough can learn to drive a vehicle. Even when we're beginners, we are the ones that sit behind the wheel of the car. We don't just turn the wheel of the car without doing anything else. We have to put our foot on the gas, just the right amount to go at the right speed. We have to be able to look in front of us and all of around us as we're doing this and putting our foot on the gas and putting off the gas and braking and turning and all those things. Driving a car is a complicated set of skills. Elephants can't do it. Monkeys can't do it. Whales and dolphins don't do it. Humans do it. We learn a common set of skills, really across the world. Cars are all made the same. Scooters are all made the same. So if we're going to drive a vehicle, we have to learn a complicated set of skills. And at every nanosecond behind the wheel of the car, in some countries, we have a very high societal expectation that we join the commonality, even though individually we may have vast differences of age, of sex, how fat we are, how thin we are, what our life is like, good or bad. But when we're behind the wheel of the car, in many, particularly modern societies, we have a 97% expectation that we adjust, adapt those skills sustainably when we are driving all the way through our journey. Because if not, we just have multiple crashes. And if you go into a lot of cultures that do not have that societal expectation, there is more death toll on the roads. Duh. Okay? And death and injury. Right? So when we think about childbirth, we have to think of it as an activity, and we have to use strong verbs about that activity. And those verbs are like cope. You have to say, how are you going to cope with, if you labor, the natural occurring pain of contractions? How are you going to cope with anxieties or fears? If you're excited and you're driving to the hospital and going to be prepped and in surgery, how are you going to manage that? Those are strong verbs. And we use those verbs because they indicate our need for becoming skilled when we're pregnant. And to know that each of us got pregnant to have a baby, each of us are going to give birth one way or another, that we strengthen ourselves, we strengthen the other person who's with us when we share skills and work together, and we strengthen our families, and we are empowered after the birth. Now, a lot of people go, Yeah, but you can only be empowered if that birth achieves a natural birth. No, that's not true. You're empowered because you damn well know that you coped better than if you didn't have those skills. You're empowered because when somebody does something to you at a birth that you're not comfortable with, and you use your breathing, you use your relaxation, and your partner's there to help you do that as well, then you know that you are coping better and you're managing, you're staying on top of, you're choosing to use skills to do that activity in an empowered manner. And it doesn't matter what is happening, whether you have tubes and wires out of every single hole in your body, if they're rude to you, if they're doing things to you you don't like. If we cope better, we manage better. And when do we see this flower and blossom? Being a parent or being in a relationship with somebody. Do you think every moment of being a parent we love? We hate a lot of it. And we can sometimes be so angry with our children. We know that if we have skills to parent well, we will not hurt that other human being, either verbally or physically. If we have skills to be effective in our relationships, then we use them, even if we feel people haven't been nice to us, we didn't get our way, we have problems, we're not doing it right. When we have skills, we do it better. And we feel empowered from problem solving when we are skilled to do that. Now, I need to tell you that when I became involved in childbirth in the early 1970s, to today, 50 years later, I have no interest in the politics of childbirth. Couldn't care less how you had your baby. You don't care how I had mine. If we met on the street, we would not say to each other, well, how was your birth? This is not what we talk about. So why have I spent 50 years of my life doing this? Because I am passionate about being skilled. Passionate. I would have preferred to have taught you how to change a flat tire, but I am passionate about being skilled. And I've lived for many, many years in cultures that don't have access to the convenience of the modern world. I thrive on being in cultures that where we have to find our own food and prepare our own food, go get our water, to make things, to do things, to know how to do things. That's my passion. And I am passionate to the skills that the hundreds of mothers and fathers alike, and let me reiterate it, fathers, men, men, we all blink, we all cough, we all tighten up our rectum. Fathers have no difficulty understanding birth and pregnancy. We just need skills. And in the first class, the second class of this, we talk about the body skills. Dads were the ones who primarily developed them, along with the women. If a woman said, my baby got stuck for hours, dads were going, why is that? And then they came up with, this is an exercise in plumbing. You got a big object in a container. The container has to open up. A stuck baby means the container isn't opening up. You can't squish the object. You have to open up the container. If we can open up the container, and therefore the birthing better body skills developed, because there were lots of them. Where are you opening up the container exactly? What part are you moving? What part do you need to prepare? How do you know if the baby is stuck? And that's why birthing better skills are so powerful. But we don't care if you use the birthing better skills. We just want you to become skilled. And we want you to learn skills that are adjustable and adaptable for your individual birth as you're doing something that you share in the commonality with every pregnant woman who has ever given birth forever and will forever. If we believe now that cesarean is not a birth, then we as women are being mean to each other. And we've become mean to each other. We've become mean to our own children. So this is what the meanness sounds like. I had a home birth. You had a hospital birth and you read everything there was. That's mean. Or, she was my home birth, speaking about her youngest child. He was my cesarean. That's mean. It's mean. And it's what women do very well. We have to stop this. We have to stop it. And we do it by becoming skilled. Nobody can take our skills away from us. Nobody can say, should have used them better. You didn't use them enough. We know that individually. But if we have a skilled birthing population, then we will all admire our skills and we can more likely teach each other. Now, if you go onto YouTube and you see women laboring, think about it. Are they very still or are they moaning and groaning? If they're moaning and groaning, the chances are that woman lacks skills. She's okay with putting her birth online, and that's absolutely fine. If you see a woman very, very still in birth, there are two things that you need to know about. First of all, you don't know what's going through her mind. She can sit there and say, I hate this. She's not behaving instinctively. She is behaving skillfully. And if you ask her afterwards, what were you doing? She'll say, I was really focusing on my breathing. I was really focusing on relaxing. That is a language of using skills. I am focusing on my breathing. She's not just focusing on that she's breathing in and out. She's focusing on doing something with her breathing that helps her cope and manage. She's not just sort of relaxing randomly. She's relaxing her body in order to give space to her baby. The difficulty when we don't live in a skilled birthing population is that if you then say to that woman, could you teach your daughter or son the type of breathing that you used? Often women can't articulate it. How did you relax? Where did you relax? Why did you relax? When did you relax? So Birthing Better Families did all of that. The why, the when, the how, the where, we did it. So that you know how, where, when, why. And we share that. So let me give you an example. You're an individual, you've been listening to this. You've been probably sitting down. You're sitting on two bones. That's part of the body skills. Those bones your baby has to come through. We talked about mapping the pelvis. See if you can put your fist between those two bones. Or when you're sitting there, could you put your fist there? So there you are sitting there. Can you make more space between them? Yes, I can. You can. Now I have a wee bit more space. Because what we learned before is a stuck baby is like this. And an unstuck baby is just softening and permitting our fingers to slide. That's unstuck. So if we make a little space between our sit bones, the baby has more space. But if you now stand up, notice what happens down there. That closes up, and the muscles that permit us to stand up then contract. That closes that space. And for our baby, that might make a difference. So today we've been talking about our individuality and how it bumps into our commonality big time. So when each of us stands up, we individually are standing up right now, but we're experiencing a commonality. We're not amoebas oozing around on the floor. All of the same muscles contract in order to keep us upright. And each of us can then soften those muscles, pay attention to the space between the sit bones, and then we soften that space that helps our baby come down through and out. Now, can a woman who's having a cesarean do the same thing? Sure. Why does she do it? Because it empowers her as a human being, as a woman, and as a birthing woman to work with her baby's birth journey, even though it is being taken out of her hands. This is important to know. So I've almost come to the hour of this class. We just would like you to share this with other people. You're the generation giving birth. You right now are the generation giving birth with this virus. But it doesn't matter because there have been women giving birth in Syria. There were women giving birth in Vietnam. There are women giving birth in Rwanda. There are women giving birth in famine now. There are women who give birth when there are wars and earthquakes, natural disasters. There are women who live in poverty. And we around the world are giving birth. And if we were all skilled, each of us who has to birth alone, who cannot give this experience over to somebody else, if we all have skills that we can teach each other and know how to pass on to our sons and daughters because they are shared common knowledge skills, then we will change the conversation in childbirth. But more importantly, we will change partnerships, and we will change families, and we will change societies because skilled people work together better. We know that in our work environments. We know that in our sports. We know that. So, thank you for joining us today. Please like our Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel where this is going to be posted. I think it's YouTube, Birthing Better 1. It's got 390 videos that I have done. I have yacked at people for years. It has made no difference. So at 76, I'm yakking again because of COVID-19. We cannot afford to have another generation of women, and it is up to you. If you become skilled, you tell your sons and daughters that it is normal and natural for you to self-learn skills when you are pregnant and to use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your sons and daughters just as I did when I birthed you. So see you again tomorrow. What are we talking about tomorrow? We're talking about the nonverbal and verbal communication skills that Birthing Better Families developed. Big issue. And touch. Because we all know in birth that if a woman gets touched in a way she doesn't like, she could bite that hand off. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Same time, this is scheduled. It's 12:30 Pacific Coast time, 7:30 in New Zealand. So I get up to do this for you. And we're going to continue for day 7. But I think I may add one more lesson, which is to talk to fathers-to-be. I have to see whether I'm going to do that or not. So thank you again. Please share this. And please tell your friends and family who are pregnant, please become skilled and use your skills as you work through the activity of birthing your baby. Bye-bye.